Hey folks, Dr. Human Kostravani here, taking a few quick takes after the simulation session we had today with regards to Code Blue simulation. First of all, thanks for visiting this website, SciLab. Hopefully it'll be a slow but growing project about how to go about medical resuscitation, both on general medicine and on the neurovascular unit. So what I wanted to tell you about is just to recap what we talked about today, which is when it comes to resuscitation or acute situations, emergency situations, you are not alone. First of all, you are in a well supported environment with lots of other expert professionals and other response teams, such as the critical care team and the rapid response team. But also, you are not alone because you are part of a global network of providers who are frontline responders to emergencies. And so in medicine, our framework is called crisis resource management, which comes from aviation's crew resource management. And so this is a cognitive and task framework which helps you be able to deal with acute emergency situations. So without any further delay, let's talk about that. So crisis resource management has a few components, and these components is essentially the framework that you can use to tackle the challenges you'll face in a resuscitation, such as a code blue. The elements of crisis resource management are used by a lot of different acute providers. So, for example, folks like emergency services, firefighters, police officers, all the way up to fighter pilots and astronauts and folks working in any high stakes environment, all of them use the elements of crisis resource management, which is derived from the word crew resource management in the aviation industry. So let's talk about those elements. So these elements include situational awareness. Situational awareness means being fully immersed and in tune with one's surroundings and attributes of those surroundings that are pertinent to the resuscitation. And situational awareness is not a static thing, it's constantly reassessing what is going on. For example, if you're running a code blue, you're standing at the head of the bed. You are looking at the quality of chest compressions. You're looking at the fatigue that the providers who are doing CPR may be experiencing. You're looking for the board underneath the patient. You're looking at the oxygen. You're looking to make sure that the oxygen line is connected correctly. So it's all of those aspects of what's happening, including what folks are talking to you about. So if someone comes in with a new piece of information or looking at the monitor on the side and the side rhythm, essentially situational awareness is an element of crisis resource management that is very pertinent to the management of acute resuscitations. And it may seem trivial, but it's important to have not only the framework of crisis resource management, but to know its ingredients and what they mean. After the context of essentially situational awareness comes the concept of role clarity. So, role clarity is super important because not only is it important to come into a resuscitation, announce who you are, be able to communicate that in a friendly and a positive manner. So, for example, hi, I'm Human, I'm the Code Blue leader. Can I just please go quickly around and get everyone's first name and thank you for being here? Those few words of just saying thank you, getting to know people's names in the context of an ad hoc team, a team that's being assembled to look after a patient, is hugely important. And this moment of pause, this moment of effectively taking a moment to certainly say, get to know people's names and to talk to them in a resuscitation and to say please and thank you generally reduces the barrier of communication, but also shows leadership and communication across the team. It provides role clarity and also sometimes even reduces the temperature and anxiety in the room because they can see that the person in charge is able to talk in a coherent manner, be able to acknowledge those in the rooms and use even simple words like please and thank you. The few milliseconds it takes to say that are invaluable. So role clarity is a way to make sure that as the resuscitation leader, one is able to go around and make sure that everyone is got a designated task that they're doing, but also are in a comfortable environment such that they can report on their task or speak up if they see something is not going on. So we talked about situational awareness, role clarity. After this comes the concept of cognitive load. So, cognitive load is the idea that you have to be aware of how many tasks and how many thoughts are actually happening in your mind, and also to look around the room and see what's going on in the rest of the team. And cognitive load is essentially a balancing measure to understand what is on your mind and the priorities and what you're trying to accomplish, but to also not overload yourself with certain tasks. So, for example, if you know now anesthesia is in the room, and in our situation, in our shop, if you will, anesthesia manages the airway, you acknowledge them and say, "Hi, thank you for being here. Could you please start airway management and let us know if you need anything? Thank you for that, and let's communicate throughout the resuscitation." But by doing that, you have now allocated a task to a designated individual who's got the cognitive capacity and dedicated role to work on that task without having to then cognitively increase the burden upon yourself, because you have to worry about hemodynamics, the monitor, all the other aspects of resuscitation. So, being aware of your own cognitive load and the cognitive load imparted on others when a task is assigned to them is central to being a good code leader, and also the group dynamics. So, crisis resource management, overall framework, situational awareness. We talked about the concept of role clarity, and we then talked about the concept of effectively cognitive load. And so the next part after those items comes the idea of triage and prioritization. What are the key tasks to focus on in the resuscitation? What is the team's mission? What should be done first, second, third, and fourth? And so this is a little bit dependent on what's happening in the resuscitation, but I would actually argue that before you ever go to a code blue session, you can do a lot of this through mindfulness, meditation, and even thinking about what are the first 5 or 10 steps you're going to do in any resuscitation. What are the first few things you're going to do? And a lot of that does focus on that primary airway, the airway, breathing, and circulation. And we talked about how when it comes to airway, what is important is the fact that the airway is patent, and there's no, for example, vomitus or other materials. And then the next thing is to actually provide a high degree of supplemental oxygen with a non-rebreather, sometimes with nasal prongs even underneath, or a bag valve mask. And we talked about ventilation being important, but the provision of oxygen is even more important, with ventilations being provided at approximately 8 to 10 breaths a minute. Again, remaining calm, not over ventilating the patient. Focusing on circulation, we talked about during the primary survey to be able to look down and see what the IV axis is and know those IV colors, right? You look down, you look at the IV axis on the patient, and you can quickly see what is going on. And we talked about that. I have a little mnemonic that I'm sure others have come up with as well, but it's commonly thought that, for example, a pink, IV line is, an 18 gauge, but in fact, the pink IV line is a 20 gauge. And so let's go through this mnemonic that helps you quickly look at a patient and think about circulation. You look down. If you see yellow, yellow is yucky. Yellow is a 24 gauge. So yellow, yucky. If you look down and you see blue, blue is bad. Blue is a 22 gauge. Again, not a good resuscitation line. Resuscitation lines need to be short and, if you will, fat, if you will, sort of large caliber, but also short to allow for a large amount of fluid to be able to give in during a resuscitation. So yellow, 24 gauge, blue is bad, it's a 22, pink is poor, it's a 20 gauge, and then you get into green. Green is good. Green is an 18 gauge IV. After green is gray. Gray is great. That's a 16 gauge. And orange is outstanding. That's a 14 gauge. And so 14 gauge angiocath is actually what's used to decompress, for example, with a needle thoracostomy, essentially when he wants to do essentially a thoracic puncture for a pneumothorax. So that's the primary survey, and then you look for disability, neurologic deficits, other abnormalities that are important. But the ABCs are super important as far as things about when you think about prioritization and triage. But again, for example, if you walk in and you realize very quickly that the patient's having an event due to the presence of a tension pneumothorax, then that is going to be also high on the priority. And so it's important to realize what is essentially the overall importance of that triage and prioritization followed by what is the next task that brings the team together on the mission to provide this resuscitation. Um, so those are the four principles. And then there is another one that is also super important, which is the concept of closed loop communication. So we talked about how when we communicate, you want to make that communication short, brief, and effective, and to close the loop. So, for example, I would like you to please hang a liter of saline and let me know when it's running and when it's done. And then the person acknowledges, I'm going to be hanging a liter of saline. It's actually running now, and I'll let you know when half the bag is in and when it's fully completed. And that is when a communication goes out to the team, it's acknowledged by a team member, and then they report back. And so that's what is called closed loop communication, and it's a central principle of an effective resuscitation. And then other principles of crisis resource management include the debriefings, which we did today, in addition to simulation, which is another core principle of crisis resource management. So those are some really important things to think about when we talk about crisis resource management. So I'd like to just recap. We have the framework of crisis resource management, which is a mindset of cognitive operational tools that help you deal with the resuscitation. You do not need to invent them, they exist in other fields and specifically have been adopted into medicine as well. So, situational awareness, role clarity, triage and prioritization, cognitive load, and closed loop communication. Those are super important aspects of crisis resource management. And in addition to that, the other things that kind of bring all of this together, like we did today, is simulation and debriefing. Now, with regards to debriefing, debriefing is done, can be done, and should be done near or proximal to the event if possible. It's done by asking the team, do folks want to debrief about the resuscitation we just performed? Do you want to come back and regroup and do it at a different time? It is usually hard to get the exact same team members given it's ad hoc teams. People are on different shifts. So, especially if a resuscitation goes very well, or if there's something that doesn't go well, you could do a quick debrief to do a kind of check in with the team to make sure everyone's feeling well. Prior to that, you essentially acknowledge that this is a quick debrief. We encourage all members to participate if they're willing. It's a safe space, psychological safety. It's a flat hierarchy. This is a non-threatening environment. We just want to talk about what happened, what we did well as a team, what were the challenges, and it's a no-blame environment. And to think about team successes and team challenges, and have an equal opportunity for all the members of the team to contribute, and to ask if there are any further follow-up concerns that need to be addressed. And that really is a professional element. We talked about how to perform excellent resuscitation, that a lot of this can also be done in the mindset of the resuscitationist, the mindset of all excellent performers. So people that are elite athletes, team players, people that do fantastic things like choreography, dance, gymnastics, race car drivers, again, fighter pilots, all of these folks, and including yourselves in medicine, the idea is to rehearse in your mind what you're going to do. The first few steps should not be invented on the spot, should not have to be thought about. They should all be choreographed and be sort of ruminated on and be very clear on what are those initial first things I'm going to do when I walk in? Where am I going to stand? How am I going to stand? How will I conduct myself? What are the first few words I'm going to say? What are the things in the room I'm looking for? What is exactly the glance and the tasks that I'm going to do? Assigning folks to do CPR, ensuring that the monitors are being placed, ensuring that the defibrillator machine is on and in the right setting, that a board is placed under the patient fairly emergently during the presence of CPR, that oxygen is being provided with a large amount of FiO2, that maybe one person could be tasked to figure out more about the patient if that information is not available, or get in touch with the family. And so those few steps should be very clear in your mind of what you're going to do. And this brings anxiolysis, this word that I use to lice anxiety, because if you know the first few steps by heart, you've already rehearsed them, you know how you're going to conduct yourself, then you kind of ease into the resuscitation. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to have that anxiety about it. And then that gives you peace and time to think. and time to really focus on the resuscitation and running the technical aspect, which is the ACLS. But as we discussed today, these non-technical aspects of using crisis resource management are as important as the medical aspects of what dose and what medication to use, because it is crisis resource management that allows you to execute effectively the principles that you need for ACLS, and to know that crisis resource management has these key pillars, which if you internalize and work on, becomes that North Star that you can work on through your residency to aim for that and to become a master resuscitationist. So thanks so much again for tuning in. Thanks for checking out the website. There are a few videos also linked below that are from a few years ago, made during my critical care fellowship. But again, they have some ingredients about the aspects of oxygenation and resuscitation, vascular access, sepsis. Hopefully, you'll find it useful. Again, it's just a starting point. There's tons of great podcasts and other videos that are available on this topic, but we wanted you to have some anchoring point after the simulation for a place to go to and listen to some of these topics. So with that, thank you for joining us on Scilab.